The House Without Windows. Prologue. My hands shake as I write this. I don't know if anyone else will be able to understand what I have discovered, what I have lived. My name is Daniel Morales, and this is my story. A story that began long before I even existed. A story that would forever change everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and reality itself. Chapter 1. The Family Legacy. It all began with a yellowed manila envelope that arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. The sender was the law firm Hernandez and Associates. My uncle Roberto had disappeared 5 years ago, and his body had never been found. The envelope contained two main documents: my uncle's will and the deed to a property. A house located on the outskirts of San Marcos, a small town lost in the mountains to the north. My uncle Roberto was not an ordinary man. A professor of ancient history, he was always considered an eccentric. I spent long periods of time researching local legends, forgotten manuscripts, and little-known archaeological sites. Its disappearance was never officially explained, and my family simply learned to live with the emptiness. Chapter 2. The Journey. A week after receiving the documents, I decided to make the trip. San Marcos was a town that seemed frozen in time. Adobe houses, narrow cobblestone streets, and a constant fog that seemed to scorch the surroundings. At the town hall, the secretary looked at me with a mix of curiosity and fear when I mentioned my uncle's property. The House Without Windows, she murmured. That's what the locals knew it as. No one remembered exactly when it was built, but they all agreed on one thing: it was best to stay away. Chapter 3. The Secret Archives. Before going to the house, I spent 2 days in the municipal archive. Records about the property were sparse and confusing. The first mention dated back to the early 19th century, when the area was practically a wilderness. I found something that left me frozen. My last name appeared repeatedly in old documents. Not only my uncle Roberto had been linked to that house. My ancestors seemed to have some kind of ancestral connection with the place. Chapter 4. The House. When I arrived at the property, the reality surpassed anything I had imagined. A gray stone construction stood alone, surrounded by dead and twisted vegetation. There was not a single window, as if the house had been designed to hide something. The key that came with the documents was ancient, almost black bronze. When I inserted it into the lock, I felt that I was not only opening a door, but awakening something that had been dormant for decades. Chapter 5. The Journals. The interior was a warren of dusty rooms. In my uncle's study, I found a series of journals and research notebooks. Their pages were filled with frantic notes, strange drawings, and references to something he called the core. The journals revealed research that went far beyond traditional history. My uncle had discovered something related to ancient rituals, an entity that did not belong in our world, and a family pact that stretched back generations. Chapter 6. The Forgotten Ritual. According to the journals, our family had been the guardians for centuries. Not of a treasure, not of a worldly secret, but of something far darker. An entity that could not be named, that could not be seen directly, but that existed in a space between the real and the imaginary. The ritual to keep it contained was complex. It required a sacrifice every generation. Not a blood sacrifice, but something much deeper: the life of a family member who would accept responsibility. Chapter 7. The Revelation. In the basement of the house, I discovered a symbol etched into the floor. It was a perfect circle with intricate carvings that seemed to move if you looked at them too long. Touching it, I experienced a vision. I saw my ancestors. I saw the moment they made the pact. I saw what they were holding back. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't a spirit. It was something that had no name, something from before our understanding of the universe. Chapter 8. The Choice. I now understood why my uncle disappeared. He wasn't kidnapped or killed. He sacrificed himself to keep the entity contained. And now it was my turn. I had two choices: continue with the ritual, become the new guardian, or break the pact and release something that could destroy not only my village but possibly the entire world. Final chapter. The Decision. I won't tell you what choice I made. That's for you to find out if you ever find this recording. I'll just tell you one thing: some secrets are better buried. Some pacts are not meant to be broken. And some houses exist for a reason beyond our understanding. The Echo of Silence. Introduction. The radio was reading 3:17 in the morning when Maria woke up with a start. It hadn't been a noise that woke her, but the opposite: an absolute silence that seemed to penetrate the walls of her small apartment. She had been living alone for 2 weeks after the death of her grandmother. The house was an old building in the historic center of the city, more than 100 years old. Its walls distilled stories, secrets that seemed to whisper in the darkest nights. The first clue. At first, it was little things. A book that changed places. A glass of water that appeared on a different table. Maria attributed it to stress, to grief, to her mind playing cruel little jokes on her. But that night was different. When she turned on the light in her room, she saw the drawing for the first time. It was on the wall right in front of her bed. A child's drawing made with what seemed to be charcoal. A faceless human figure with arms too long to almost touch the ground. Maria blinked. The drawing was still there. The inheritance. Among the few belongings she had inherited from her grandmother, she found an old photo album. Most of them were old family portraits, serious faces staring at the camera with a stiffness typical of the time. On the last page was a different photo. It wasn't a family portrait. It was a picture of the same house where she lived now but taken decades ago. And in one of the upper windows, barely visible, was a figure. A faceless figure. The sounds began 3 days later. At first they were subtle. An almost imperceptible scraping inside the walls. A creaking that seemed to move, to change place. Maria tried to convince herself that it was the age of the building. The old plumbing systems, the wood expanding with changes in temperature. But the sounds had a pattern. They always appeared at the same time. 3:17 in the morning. The investigation. She decided to investigate the history of the building. In the municipal library she found old records that confirmed something her grandmother had told her years ago. The building had originally been an orphanage. An orphanage that closed abruptly in 1932 after a series of unexplained disappearances of children. The revelation. The night she discovered everything, Maria woke up again at 3:17. But this time there was no silence. There were voices. Children's voices whispering something she couldn't understand. She got up and walked into the hallway. The whispers were coming from within the walls. That was when she saw the faceless figure. Bigger. Closer. The end. No one ever knew what happened to Maria that night. Her apartment appeared intact, as if it had never been inhabited. Only she was missing. And on the wall, right where her bed had been, there was a new child's drawing. A faceless human figure. With arms too long. The end. The echoes of penumbra. Prologue. If you are listening to this, it means you need to understand the truth. A truth that has been buried for decades. A truth that forever changed my life and that of my family. My name is Elena Ramirez and this is my story. Chapter 1. The Family Legacy. It all began with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. My uncle Alberto, the last of the Ramirez family still alive, had died under strange circumstances in his country house in Penumbra, a small town lost in the mountains of the south. Alberto was not an ordinary man. A geologist by profession, he had dedicated his life to the investigation of unexplained geological phenomena. His colleagues considered him an eccentric, but I always knew there was something more to his investigations. Chapter 2. The Legacy. A week after the funeral, I received a certified package. It contained an old journal, several maps marked with strange symbols, and a bronze key with inscriptions that I did not recognize. In his will, Alberto had left me his country house. A property that had been in our family for generations, but which no one had fully inhabited in years. Chapter 3. Gloom. The town was a strange place. Built in the middle of a valley surrounded by mountains that seemed to swallow the sky. The houses, made of wood and stone, seemed to be in a constant state of decay as if time itself had stopped. The locals looked at me with a mix of curiosity and fear when I mentioned my last name. The Ramirez, they murmured, were always different. Chapter 4. Alberto's Diary. At night in the old family home, I began to read my uncle's diary. Its pages were filled with scientific notes, but also with something else. Theories about interdimensional portals, about places where reality bends back on itself. One entry in particular caught my eye. Dated just a month before his death, it spoke of a discovery that would forever change our understanding of the universe. Chapter 5. The Cave. According to the journal, Alberto had found a unique geological formation in the outskirts of the village. A cave that did not appear on any map, a formation that defied the laws of traditional geology. The maps that came with the journal showed the exact location. An area marked with symbols that looked like a mix between scientific writing and something older, more obscure. Chapter 6. The Expedition. I couldn't resist the temptation. A week after arriving in Penumbra, I decided to follow my uncle's maps. The cave entrance was hidden among dense, twisted vegetation. Rocks covered in dark green moss formed a sort of natural arch. The bronze key I had inherited fit perfectly into an opening I hadn't noticed before. Chapter 7. Beyond Reality. What I found inside defied rational explanation. The cave was not a natural formation. It was a structure, a place built by something or someone that did not belong to our understanding of the world. The walls were covered in inscriptions. They weren't hieroglyphics, they weren't known symbols. They were something different. A language that seemed to move if you looked at it too long. Chapter 8, The Family Secret. It was then that I understood the true meaning of my uncle's notes. Our family was not simply a family of scientists. We were guardians. Keepers of a secret that had been passed down through generations. A secret related to what my uncle called convergence points. Places where reality thins, where what we know as the universe can break. Chapter 9, The True Nature. The cave was one of those points. A place where the barrier between dimensions became translucent. My uncle had been studying how to contain what was on the other side. Because there was something. Something that had no name. Something that was waiting. Chapter 10, The Choice. Now I understood why my uncle had died. It was no accident. It was a sacrifice to keep contained that which should never awaken. And now it was my turn to continue his work. Final chapter, The Pact. I won't tell you what decision I made. You'll find out for yourself if you ever find this record. I'll just tell you one thing. Some secrets are better buried. Some portals should remain closed. And some families carry a weight that goes beyond what anyone could imagine. The end. The Forgotten Record. Prologue. The rain was beating against the windows of the small municipal library when I found the document. It was not a book nor an official file. It was something different. A yellowed, almost transparent file, hidden among the oldest files in the basement. My name is Carlos Mendoza, archivist. And what I am about to tell will forever change the way I see the world. Chapter 1, The Discovery. I had been working in the historical archives of San Isidro for years. A small, quiet town, where nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen. My job was to catalog old documents, to preserve the local historical memory. That day was different. A restoration of the basement archives had led me to review files that no one had touched in decades. The document had no date. It had no letterhead. Just a typewritten text with a clarity that defied the passage of time. Chapter 2, The Report. The text began like this: Confidential Record. File 1742B. Unexplained event on the western borders of the municipality. What followed left me frozen. According to the document, something had happened in 1872 on the vacant land west of the town. An event that the authorities of the time had decided to completely erase from the official records. Chapter 3, The Missing. The report spoke of 17 people. Entire families who had disappeared without a trace in a single day. It was not a kidnapping. There were no signs of violence. A group of people had simply left their homes, their belongings, their lives, and vanished. The strangest thing, all the witnesses described exactly the same thing. A fog that did not behave like a normal fog. A light coming from the west. Chapter 4, The Investigation. I spent weeks researching. I searched through old newspapers, parish records, any document that might confirm the story. Almost nothing. It was as if that day had been erased from the collective memory. But then I found something. A photograph in a forgotten family album. A picture taken in 1872 on the grounds where the families had disappeared. In the background, barely visible, was something. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a recognizable object. It was something that shouldn't exist. Chapter 5, The Place. I decided to visit the place. The wasteland was still exactly the same as it was 150 years ago. An empty field, surrounded by dry bushes, with a strange stillness that seemed to swallow up sounds. That's when I saw it. A dot on the horizon. A light that wasn't light. A movement that wasn't a movement. Final chapter, The Warning. I won't tell you what happened next. I won't tell you if I came back. I won't tell you what I actually saw. I'll just warn you about one thing. Some secrets are better left forgotten. Some documents should never have been found. The end.